Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we look at Zowie Haygarth, who on a night out got into an altercation and slashed the face in an attack against Chloe Smith, who said she had been left a changed person from the attack. A 36-year-old mum who went for a night out on the town whilst high on cocaine slashed a woman at her home after an altercation between Zowie Haygarth and Chloe Smith. Zowie Haygarth went back to Chloe Smith's Birkenhead flat with a group of people who had stayed up drinking and taking cocaine until 8 AM after a night out. The 36-year-old was asked to leave after becoming rowdy after leaving Miss Smith's flat. Miss Haygarth had realised she had left her bag at Miss Smith's flat. Miss Haygarth then went back to Miss Smith's flat in an attempt to get her bag back. On Miss Haygarth's return to the flat, knocking on the flat door, Miss Smith came back to open the door of her flat and was asked if Miss Haygarth could collect her forgotten bag. As soon as Miss Smith went to hand her the bag, Miss Smith was attacked by Miss Haygarth, who wielded a knife, or a knife equivalent, and dug the weapon into Miss Smith's face. Ben Jones, prosecuting, said Miss Smith had been out with friends in Birkenhead Town Centre on February 28, 2020. Mr. Jones said Miss Smith had been out with her boyfriend Scott Maxwell and their friend Max Brown, and while in a taxi home, Mr. Brown invited Miss Haygarth to carry on socialising with the group at Miss Smith's flat. Mr. Jones said the parties continued to consume alcohol and all parties took cocaine. Going on to say, Mr. Haygarth became verbally abusive and threatened to strangle Miss Smith's dog and smash the place up. Miss Haygarth left when asked but returned for her handbag, which Miss Smith handed to her at the front door. Mr. Jones said Miss Haygarth began immediately grabbing her by the hair and pulling her to the ground. One of the witnesses said Miss Haygarth wrapped the woman's hair around her hand before punching Miss Smith repeatedly in the face. Miss Smith felt something very sharp, which she felt Miss Haygarth digging into her face. As a result, Miss Smith suffered multiple lacerations to her face, which will leave permanent scars. Miss Smith had suffered from PTSD after the attack and said the scars on her face made her feel very self-conscious. Miss Haygarth has previous convictions from when she was a juvenile, including 2 counts of actual bodily harm in 1999. In April this year, Miss Haygarth was fined for assaulting an emergency worker. David Polgate, defending, said Miss Haygarth had vulnerabilities and difficulties which affect how she behaves. Mr. Polgate said there was no evidence to suggest that Miss Haygarth's disorder reduced her culpability, but added someone without those difficulties may have reacted very differently. He went on to say Mrs. Haygarth has dependency issues and had recently made attempts to take her own life. Mr. Polgate said, there has clearly been a long-standing difficulty with alcohol, long-standing issues with domestic violence, long-standing issues with mental health, and that has led to the issues of self-harm. He continued, she didn't have long-term stability and had been unable to stay sober, anxiety-free and receive treatment. Miss Haygarth of Craven Street, Birkenhead admitted causing grievous bodily harm. Judge Anil Murray, sentencing, said the injuries must have been caused by a knife or a knife equivalent like broken glass or a bottle. The judge said he didn't find it was a prolonged or persistent incident, but there was grave injury which had resulted in permanent scarring to Chloe Smith's face. Judge Murray said he took into account Mrs. Haygarth's dependency issues and is a high risk of putting her own life in danger, or even as far as taking her own life. The judge said Mrs. Haygarth had been a victim of domestic violence in the past and that her father had recently died. The court heard Mrs. Haygarth suffers from emotionally unstable personality disorder, and according to a pre-sentence report that stated she can't be managed in the community and would need continued support to ensure the safety and welfare of Mrs. Haygarth. The judge said he did not find that Mrs. Haygarth's condition significantly reduced her culpability, but noted her condition would make custody more difficult. Mrs. Haygarth was sentenced to 25 months in prison and received a 5-year restraining order. So what do you think of Zowie Haygarth and the trouble surrounding the choices made on that wild, out-of-control night where she slashed the face, argued and trashed Chloe Smith to an unrelenting degree? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.